There are very few games in my life that I've finished, but instead of putting it down, I just start from the beginning. I'll take my time in the credits and the main menu after to absorb the experience, but I just hop right back in shortly after. I'd consider these my absolute favorites. My favorite gaming experiences throughout my entire life lived through the hobby. The most recent to join that very small pool is 9 Souls. But what is it that makes this game so profound, so excellent, so replayable? Well, don't get ahead of yourself, we'll get to that in a minute, but before I get ahead of myself, there will be spoilers for 9 Souls in this video. I'll avoid specific story spoilers, and it'll be obvious when I start talking about bosses, so I'll have chapters on for you to bounce around as well. I'll also be showing or discussing most areas and abilities. If at any point you find yourself interested, please do yourself a favor and go experience the game yourself, and then come right back after. 9 Souls is a 2024 Metroidvania that follows Yi, a revered Solarian who has been betrayed and murdered by his mentor. In a quest for revenge, you must play as Yi as he hunts the Soul Council that betrayed him. But what better place to start than the combat? This is of course the crisp gameplay loop that will keep you coming back long after you finish 9 Souls, because where there's difficulty, there's mastery. But that mastery won't come easy, and I'm certain you'll be chasing it throughout the entire game. It might not look like it a whole lot, but 9 Souls is very similar to Sekiro in a lot of ways. It's a strange similarity that might be sort of hard to describe, but you can just feel it throughout the entire game on a very deep level. At its core, 9 Souls is a very simple game masquerading as a very complicated one, again, like Sekiro. New tools and additions to your kit will make the game a tad more complex, but while they make your moveset more exciting, they're really just there to put you on even footing with the bosses and new enemies introduced along the way. Like most Metroidvanias, you'll feel very limited in the game's early hours. However, that's completely intentional, and dare I say it's a good thing. 9 Souls is hard. And I mean hard. You can freely adjust your damage dealt and taken in the settings if you need it, but playing at the baseline difficulty, you should be having a fairly tough time. By locking your movement to a slash combo, jump, parry, dash, and talisman, which we'll get to, right at the start, it allows you to grow more comfortable with the tools one at a time, and gives the character of Yi the opportunity to relearn them as he regains his confidence. This eventually blossoms into a charged heavy attack, double jump, air dash, bow, and more. All of these are pretty self-explanatory, but the talisman is the one that's a little less obvious if you haven't played the game. This is going to be your primary way of punishing enemies, particularly bosses and larger enemies that take a bit longer to kill. Attacks and parries will rack up internal damage on an enemy. The only way this counts as health lost is if you use a talisman attack on them, which you can charge by parrying attacks. Upon detonating, this instantly hurts the enemy for all of the internal damage and a little extra. Think sort of like Sekiro's posture system. You're being rewarded for successfully deflecting attacks, but instead of taking their remaining health and effectively insta-killing them, you're being given a huge payout of damage on the enemy. More sporadic enemies with harder patterns or more attacks are more difficult, but they're also giving you more opportunities to deal internal damage. There are 3 variations of the talisman, which we'll touch on a little bit in the progression section, but 2 of those require you to use it at the right time, as using it when the boss is not stunned or vulnerable will allow them to attack you while it's charging, canceling the talisman, taking your talisman charges, and dealing huge damage to you in the process. It's not just a free nuke on your enemy, it's another piece of your kit that requires timing and learning your own limits as well as your opponent's. But this encapsulates perfectly what makes the combat of 9 Souls tick. Whether you choose the talisman or not, whether you parry on the ground or in the air, whether you break a shield with a charged heavy or the bow, they're all decisions you have to make without thinking, because this game allows you very little time to do so. Because of how well the game is made, moment-to-moment gameplay flows as smoothly as it ever could, and you're going to be making hundreds of back-to-back tiny little choices in every single fight, and you won't even notice. While the game doesn't have any traditional tutorials, it does such a good job teaching you how to use your kit effectively through gameplay that it doesn't even matter. In fact, it's so sly about slipping in these little lessons that new things will show up and you'll just know what to do, and you won't even know why. It's the reason you feel a fighting chance your very first attempt against a new boss, because you've been unknowingly trained to react exactly the way you need to. But those bosses, how do they stack up to the greats?
Well, if they're the main thing you're coming for, we'll just put it this way. You're not going to be disappointed. For starters, this game has 10 main story bosses. These are obviously going to have specific plot relevance, but are also the most fleshed out fights in the game. On top of those, there's also a bunch of world bosses that serve as sort of optional challenges for a nice extra fight, while usually offering some pretty nice rewards as well. You can find these just by exploring each zone. The bread and butter of this roster, though, is going to be the game's main story bosses. I had a minor fear when I started that these would feel sort of samey, as each of them are the same race of creatures and are also all part of a government council, essentially, but that's not the case at all, as there's a ton of different elements to set each one apart from the others. First off, their aesthetics. Now yes, they are all cat people, sort of, but you'd be surprised what kind of variety you can get away with there. Each character, for example, is built distinctly different. I've always considered a good character design one that you can tell who it is strictly by looking at their silhouette, and that absolutely applies here. Just outside of their frame, each one also has certain attributes the others may be lacking. A particular weapon, accessory, eyebrows, bird feet. Jiequan and his outfit is colored in a way that signals his royal heritage. The Fangs don ornamental headgear that shows their opulent background, and Lady Ethereal bears butterfly wings that signal her as evolved, in a sense, and also it's just an interesting visual touch. And the obvious difference between all of these is the fights themselves. It can be sort of hard to describe what makes the fights in this game so good. Each fight just keeps compounding the lessons that you've been learning, but by that logic, they should feel like different steps on the same set of stairs, but they're not. They all just feel unique because they apply those lessons differently. And then there's the final boss. Now, of course, I'm not going to show too much of the fight, but this was my experience with her. Very few times have I been so thoroughly challenged by a game. For most of the game, this wasn't the case. It was hard, but it wasn't enraging. I've not felt the way that Nine Souls' final boss made me feel since my first time fighting Ishin. I felt genuine malice. Gradually, that malice became mild annoyance, and eventually it became a deep-seated love for a fight I honestly believed was utter bullshit for a several-hour stretch. At times it seemed too fast to be fair, too punishing to be fun, but eventually the entire game caught up with me. It felt like all at once, all of the lessons it had been trying to teach me throughout finally started to make sense, and everything just sort of clicked. The fight still took me a bunch of tries, but where I once sat in awe, death after death, it became less overwhelming. Each attack stretched out before me in ways that felt impossible. One frame is comprehended as 10 different pieces, each second broken down by the individual frame, giving your brain just enough time to make those decisions. Nine Souls' true final boss is one of the most fun, most frustrating, and most difficult bosses that I've ever faced, even with the crutch of being fully kitted out. It brings out a flow state that is indescribable, quite honestly, and it easily transformed this near-perfect experience to my personal game of the year. If you play Nine Souls, I highly recommend striving for the true ending. It's well worth the experience. But neither the bosses, nor the combat, nor the RPG elements would have quite the same punch without the game's excellent aesthetics. Now, the game's style has been self-described by the developers as Tao Punk, which blends the philosophies and ideas of Taoism and the aesthetics of cyberpunk. The emphasis on parry and deflection is a great example of this. One of the team's core goals was to create a system that uses your opponent's strength against them, requiring you to use the balance and, quote, quiet intensity that's so rooted in Taoist belief. This aesthetic, that is, to my knowledge, coined by Red Candle Games, weaves its way so seamlessly into the gameplay that I can't see another team capable of pulling off a game like this with such an intense commitment to its fundamental themes. Though its overall themes and messaging hadn't been decided on at the beginning, the story they were telling made it natural to weave in ideas of nature versus technology and the very meaning of life and death. And the Tao part of this style is big, but punk, the other half of that word, they also fully commit to. The blending of man and machine, exploration of intersect between high and low culture near post-apocalyptic world brought about by arrogance. These are all ideas common of cyberpunk media that happen to mesh perfectly with the other ideas dredged up by the Tao half of that style. Then there's everything else. Enemies and architecture are clearly inspired by age-old Chinese myths and ideas, but then they're twisted by this mechanical touch to show how the Solarians have morphed their world and culture. The music shares that quality, with many tracks being fairly traditional, composed of massive drums, gongs, wind chimes, flutes, and an almost operatic vocalist. And then it'll switch into the hardest breakcore you've ever heard in your life. This gorgeous, unique presentation is supported even further by these comic-style panels made for the big story moments in each main boss. There are a couple of cutscenes, but I honestly prefer this. It's different and it looks great. As a Metroidvania, the progression is going to be very familiar to people who've played other games of the genre, but it blends a lot of systems together pretty well. For starters, all of the main additions to your kit will be obtained through the story, which we've talked about already. This will usually be about halfway through an area or towards the end. Whatever you gain will almost always open up new pathways within the current region, old areas, and give you new possibilities from the interconnected middle section. Outside of unlockable abilities, we have the skill tree. Now, these upgrades aren't going to be quite as exciting as entirely new abilities, but you'll definitely feel them. Here you can expect stuff like extra damage, changes to your parry, the ability to get up faster, different types of talisman attacks, stuff like that. The method of getting these is also pretty similar to Sekiro. Basically, you'll get an XP bar, and if you fill it up all the way, you'll get 1 skill point. If you die, you'll drop the XP you're currently holding, as well as your currency, but you can just go pick it up afterwards. It's not really that big of a deal. If you do happen to die before reclaiming your stuff, you'll keep full skill points anyways. You'll just lose the coins and all of the loose XP. Gradually, your damage will also increase by collecting Tao fruits, key items you can find by exploring and defeating bosses. There are 18 of these in the game, a lot of them being kind of spoon-fed to you, each one giving skill points and marginally increasing attack damage when collected. You don't necessarily need to find all of these to make it through the game. I explored a lot, but actually missed quite a few my first time around. With some exploration, you should have plenty to take you to the end of the game though, especially since a good majority of them will be dropped from bosses. The most interesting progression system comes with the game's slice of life stuff. Interacting with NPCs, following up on quest lines, maintaining your home base, things like that. Now don't get me wrong, this is a very standard RPG element. It's not crazy in depth or super complicated, but it's done well and it complements the rest of the game wonderfully. Doing this will open up new areas to you, allow you to reach the true ending and final boss, and most importantly, increase your max health. Nine Souls is my favorite game released in 2024, and it's not close. It's a common belief that the Game Awards don't really matter, but actually they kind of do. Essentially being the Oscars for games, something as simple as a nomination, even if they don't win, allows game developers to show off that people love what they make. In many ways, the Game Awards gives developers a chance to be legitimized. Look at how many people said they'd never heard of Ballad before it got nominated for Game of the Year, of all things, and now Ballad was huge. I wasn't in love with 2024's picks. I actually had a video filmed, and I just was so unpassionate about last year's awards show that I scrapped it entirely. I didn't really care about most of the big nominees, and there were plenty of high-profile snubs all around. I mean, no Animal Well shout for indie game or something, for anything at all, or are we joking? And of course that's an opinion, but there are so many beautiful games that fly under the radar every year that it's hard to get excited about the ones you do care about winning. But among those snubs this year was Nine Souls, a beautiful game with incredible attention to detail and an unmatched level of passion behind it. Passion you can see and feel in every single frame. It's a game I got to late, fashionably as usual, and a game that will undoubtedly enter my catalog of yearly revisits. If you are, for some reason, still watching this video, and you have, for some reason, not played Nine Souls, please, for the love of God, do yourself a favor. It doesn't have to hook everybody, and chances are it won't. And if you think that you won't like the game, that's fine, but all I ask is that you give it a chance. But that's going to be everything today. If you enjoyed the video, make sure you drop a like and let me know your favorite Metroidvania in the comments down below. For more videos like this, be sure to subscribe as well. Thank you all so much for watching. Have a great night, and I'll catch you in the next one.